I'm sitting down here with Mr. Matt Temple. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing great.
Great. Thanks for making the drive down here to Joliet.
Absolutely.
So, Matt, I appreciate you coming out and taking some of your summer vacation time. I'm just reading your shirt that says summer vacation.
Exactly.
To come and sit down with us here. But I'd love to just get right into it, and we'll start, chronologically here. Can you kind of take us maybe a little bit briefly about your musical upbringing and what has led you to where you are today? Just a little snapshot of that.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Glen Ellen, Illinois, which is this very picturesque, beautiful western suburb of Chicago, and literally has a lake right next to the high school, which looks like an old castle, Glenbard West. I started trumpet in third grade, which was a little early as far as beginning band goes, but that's how they did it in my district. And then I started piano in seventh grade. And when I got into high school, I got involved in a rock band with my good friends, so I picked up the bass guitar. And a year later, we kicked out our lead guitarist, and I assumed that position. But I had Don Cruz as my junior high band director at Hadley Junior High. And I think my eighth grade year was literally his first year at Hadley. And he immediately turned the band around. I mean, he had us going to Super State that year, and they were immediately earned the honor band. So, I mean, it was just like whirlwind, poof, overnight. Cruz just whipped that program into shape. And then I went to Glenbard West, where I had Mark Hengish as my high school director. My mom always used to say that I got the best of both worlds, because Don was this really technically proficient director where he could just get every note lined up perfectly and exact. And Mr. Hingish was just this incredibly exuberant musical personality. And so she felt like I always had this great balance of technique and musicianship, which I didn't really understand until years later how much I benefited from that. As I said, I was also in a high school rock band. And by my senior year, it looked like all three of us were going to be going into music, and I was the only one that ended up going into music education. My other two friends went into music business, and one of them almost made it. I mean, his band was on the Dumb and Dumber soundtrack.
Okay.
They're in the gas station scene where he almost catches himself on fire. But I was the loner that decided to go into music ed. So then I matriculated to the University of Illinois. The funny thing about that is I really knew nothing about colleges or universities or programs. My parents were very hands-off as far as that process. So I just started applying to what I considered to be great schools. So I started applying to University of Illinois, Indiana, Northwestern. And so during my senior year, winter break rolls around and I come home from school and I'm starting to fill out the applications, and I open the Northwestern application and it says, letter of recommendation from a teacher. I'm like, well, I guess I'm not applying there because it's winter break and I didn't ask my teacher. So I crossed that off my list. So I applied to Indiana and U of I. I took the audition at U of I, and 2 weeks later, I was supposed to take my audition at Indiana, and I got my acceptance letter to U of I like a week after the audition. So then again, naively, I was like, well, I got accepted to U of I, so I'm not going to take that audition at Indiana. So I really just kind of landed at U of I by accident.
Is that commercial for the college?
Yeah, right. Go there if you have no other plans. No, I was a smart kid, and like in high school, I was originally thinking, well, I'm either going to be an engineer or I'll go into music education. But when I started at U of I also had no idea how strong the music education program was.
Okay,
no idea whatsoever. I just sort of walked into it, and I learned very quickly that they had this incredible heritage and history. and that they were ranked incredibly high, like nationwide, and so I was just incredibly fortunate and lucky to land where I did, seemingly just by fate. I had incredible music education professors there, Daniel Kohut and Thomas Wisniewski, who were I like to call bad cop, good cop. I mean, they were like complete polar opposites, and just offered a really nice perspective for every kid there. The band team was incredible. Gary Smith was there, James Keene, Cody Birdwell was finishing. I think he had maybe finished his doctorate, but he was the assistant band director. He's now the director of bands at University of Kentucky. And then Peter Griffin was finishing his doctorate, and he's now at Elmhurst College. So it was just an incredibly rich environment, and prepared me well for when I started out in the real world. As far as positions, I started at Flora, which was a very small rural town in southern Illinois. And when I would tell people where I was teaching, they go, "Oh, you're teaching in Florida?" "No, I'm teaching in Flora, Illinois. You've never heard of it." I was typical first-year band director. I was married to my job. I was probably the most eligible bachelor in town because everyone my age had moved out after they graduated high school. So I very willingly just, slaved over the program. And at that time, I built a lot of like a sort of the total program. I was doing musical theater, music appreciation, choir, and band. So it was, jack of all trades, master of none. And I made a lot of mistakes there, and there was no one really around that I could consult. So a lot of it was, I was sort of self-taught when I started out in the profession. So after a few years there, I decided to pursue my graduate studies, and my plan from the very beginning was to go back full-time and be a graduate assistant, because that seemed to really appeal to me when I was an undergraduate, seeing the graduate assistants and what they did. So I was looking at universities, and initially I was looking at a lot of Big Ten schools, but I called up the local director near Flora who was teaching at Eastern Illinois University, and that was Dr. Joseph Manfredo, and he had started teaching at Eastern Illinois the exact same year that I had started teaching at Flora. So he did a lot of reach out to the local directors, and I had seen him direct an honor band festival that had included my high school. And so I started consulting Dr. Manfredo about my graduate school search, and eventually he more or less talked me into coming to Eastern instead, which worked out really well because the experience I had at Eastern was way more personalized than what I probably would have gotten at any of the Big Ten schools. I had a tremendous amount of podium time. I wrote drill for multiple shows, whereas like at your typical Big Ten, you might write drill for one show as a graduate assistant. I was writing drill for all the shows. I got to rehearse the campus band, like that was my band in the spring. So I was rehearsing, multiple pieces. Whereas again, if you're at a Big Ten school, you might rehearse one piece the entire year. And it was a 2-year program. So I had that much more time to just really dig in and learn a lot from someone that I really esteemed and admired. Dr. Manfredo taught me a lot about score study and what he called phrasal analysis, like just breaking down the piece, phrase by phrase and really examining every element of the piece. I remember in one of the graduate classes, he used the Leonard Bernstein book, The Unanswered Question 6 Talks at Harvard, which was really scholarly and sort of blew my mind as a young director. Some funny memories about Dr. Manfredo. He was always very fond of taking his glasses off every single time he would make a comment from the podium. So he got in this... And it was basically because his vision was so bad that he had to put the glasses on in order to see the score, but then for some reason he felt compelled to take them off every time that he would talk to the ensemble, and anyone that's ever played under him can relate to that story.
So a good interviewer would then kind of segue more into the, Dr. Manfredo questions with this, but that's not me. I got a couple of questions that came up here.
It's all good. It's all good.
Just for the fun part of it, I want to go back to the rock thing real quick.
Sure.
So what influences for that, just so we can kind of paint a picture? What did we sound like? Was this the alternative grunge era?
It was alternative, but it was before grunge. It was just a few years before grunge. So this was like the late 80s.
Okay.
Alternative rock. So my favorite band of all time is The Smiths, which was a British rock band, and other things like The Cure, Red Hot Chili Peppers, REM.
Okay.
So a lot of those bands were still around today.
Yeah,
but a lot of them, they were basically starting out. And we were mainly a cover band, but we did record 2 full albums of our own material.
I'm going to link them.
Yeah, none of which I'm going
to... No, I'll find them.
I don't think any of it's online.
Not yet.
And I'm coming up on my 30th high school reunion. That's bizarre to even say that. But at the 20th reunion, we did get back together and we jammed. So like I said, the other 2 went into the music business, and I think they've continued to play a lot more than I have. I still play mainly acoustic now with my good friend, actually from U of I days, and we do just a lot of covers, but it's all acoustic. So it's like Foo Fighters, Dave Matthews, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So no, I was just interested in that portion and just thought it was kind of a neat thing to hear. Often when we talk to music educators, it's, sometimes here's this classically trained, straight and narrow.
Yeah.
And now I'm picturing you with the, the late 80s dreads.
And I had hair back then. So, and I did wear combat boots, mainly just for performances. But there was an area of the high school. It was one of the only areas in the high school that actually had carpet.
Yeah.
So we were called the carpeted area people.
Okay.
Because that's where we would hang out before school. And we were all decked out in pea coats and striped shirts and high tops. I mean, that was pretty much the rage when I was in high school. So.
And it's interesting because I graduated high school early 2000s, but we still had rock bands that were going. There's no rock bands in high schools around here that I see. I don't, like, and if there are, I don't hear about them at all. You just don't see a lot of kids getting together and jamming like that, which is something I'm a little, nostalgic over there.
Yeah. So, and one of the things that believe it or not, that I most credit to those days are my aural skills.
Yeah.
Because there were no tab books back then.
Okay.
Like, you couldn't go out and buy the music for any of these bands. And so we had to learn everything by ear. Mm-hmm. So we were literally listening to the records and the tapes and playing it over and over and over. And is that a minor chord? Is that a major chord? What's that added note? It's a seventh. As a high school student, these things kind of blew my mind. But then sure enough, when I got to U of I was able to test out of almost all of my aural skills classes, because I know what that is. I can write that down.
That's funny you mentioned that, because I do remember when I was learning guitar in high school, I went to tabplanet.com.
Exactly.
And boom, here it is. Here's this Green Day song that's got 3 notes. But there's that. Let's talk real quick, if you don't mind, too. There was something that you said that I thought was pretty important. And you said you were slaving over the job and you were married to the job at the beginning. And I hear that from so many people, but I guess my follow-up question would be, do you think you'd be in the place you are today without doing that?
No.
Okay.
And, I've been teaching long enough that I feel like there are basically some phases you go through as a director, where you're young and curious and eager and willing to do just about anything in the beginning. And then at some point, if you settle down and you have a significant other, then things start to taper off. And then if you end up raising a family together, I mean, it all sort of goes, with your life cycles, and you have to be really conscientious and thoughtful about how you balance all of that along the way.
Okay. Because that's just always my question with this. I hear I did this the first 2, 3, 5, 10 years of the career.
I think it's a rites of passage.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Like it is a little bit of an endurance test. And, unfortunately, I think that's why 50% of new teachers drop out of the profession within the first 5 years. But that's across the board. That's not just music.
So what do you think it is then? Is it, as you're saying, maybe you get through different walks of life, or do some people get a more maybe efficient with their teaching,
for sure.
Or is it that you just kind of realize at some point, like, this isn't as important as I thought it was, this maybe specific choice or action here?
All of the above.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you get tremendously more efficient, and then you start prioritizing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Joe Manfredo, I'd like to talk about him a little bit.
Yeah.
Now that we've cleanly segued to this portion here, because he's somebody that's come up before with other people, and he seems very influential. What are some characteristics? You talked about how there's phrasal analysis. You talked about some score study. You talked about the experience that you got. But what are like some characteristics of a Joe Manfredo that makes him somebody that really was influential to you and other teachers?
Well, I'm really intrigued and fascinated by lineage of band directors, and Manfredo was Bijan's last conducting intern.
Okay.
And when I was at Eastern, Manfredo had Bijan onto campus and did a 4-day residency, and as part of that residency, I got to have dinner with him. I got to have a private conducting lesson. I got to play principal trumpet on Armenian dances under his baton. I mean, it was just an incredible time. But I think a lot of what I learned from Manfredo was things that he learned from Bijan, and just that, consistency of passing on the band tradition and the band lineage. So with Manfredo, he's Italian, which means he's feisty, and so he demands, he can have a demanding presence on the podium. He's very headstrong. He knows what he wants and how to get it. And he was very charismatic. I mean, he could, he recruited me to come to grad school there. And I never did I think, I'm going to go to Eastern Illinois for my master's degree, and he would draw all sorts of students to that school. I mean, he was a real kid magnet. And so the kids were excited to play for him. He was demanding, he could get a lot out of them. And I think, like I said, I think some of that is an homage to Bijan, just like a strong podium personality.
So as we go on into this a little bit more here, I've got a couple of things as I have met you before, and I've done some research. There's a couple of things that come up. One of them is comprehensive musicianship, and the other one, and not to like pigeonhole into this, but is non-competitiveness.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Just basically what your philosophies on competition are in schools, with students, with band programs. Well,
when I started teaching, I dutifully took my Flora band to IHSA organizational contest, and we got our Division I's and all that. And then when I started my second position at Waubonsee Valley High School in Aurora, I think the idea of competition was sort of in a state of flux. And I remember Chip Staley, who was teaching at Neuqua Valley, our sister high school at the time, was really steering away from competition. And so we were starting to design student experiences like the Solo Ensemble Festival and their own organizational festival where it was no longer a contest. And really the focus became more on just the music making. And even as a director, I felt sort of this tremendous sense of relief. Like, I'm not going to be ranked. I'm not going to be scored. It's one thing when your band does well and you feel proud of your students' accomplishments, and the kids do. But when you don't do as well, at least in the eyes of, some evaluator,
sure,
it can often take a little bit too much of a toll on the pride or the esteem of the organization. And I can remember very distinctly when I was at Waubonsee Valley, the year that our marching band started to do really well. And we went to a marching competition at Prospect High School. And it was a wet competition. It was raining right before we went out, and we came off the field and we just did not feel that great about the performance. And so we were huddling up as a marching band and talking about it and saying, well, that wasn't our best show, but, we've got a couple more this season, and now we know what we need to go after, and so on and so forth. Well, the irony of the whole situation is we ended up getting first place that night. So, and then it felt a little odd, well, that wasn't our best performance, but relative to other bands, it was. So then, the kids go goo goo gaga. Oh, we got first place. But it felt a little disingenuous as a teacher and as an educator, because that wasn't a true indicator of how, we were doing as an organization that night. Anyway, fast forward several years later, when I got to New Trier, the philosophy of that department for a long time was all non-competition.
Okay.
Just, the opposite of it. And I think the biggest argument for the non-competitive philosophy is basically, once you establish a program and you're achieving at a very high level, I don't know that you need that impetus of competition to continue to motivate you or propel you. Like the program sort of gains its own inertia, and kids really want to play well and do well, regardless of whether they're getting a pat on the back or not. I think fundamentally it comes down to music is art and art is subjective. So it's meant to be interpreted and open to interpretation. And I think sometimes, like if you pit 10 amazing bands against one another, but they're all playing different music, well, who's to say which band is the best or better?
Sure.
Maybe all 10 are great. And that's not to discredit, the fact that, yes, some bands do play better than other bands, but I don't know that comparison is worth its weight in gold as far as what music education is about.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I think that whether you participate in competitions or not, the emphasis has to be on music and art, expressing who you are as a group, as an individual, learning, different interpretations and different perspectives. And yes, you can do that through competition. You just got to make sure that the emphasis is not on the ratings.
Sure. And that was something that I've been thinking about more and more lately. And I've even been trying to think like, yes, maybe that should be the concept of it. But do the logistics of that change depending on where you are, socioeconomic status? Maybe it's a rural, urban school. Because I think
they do. I mean, it's easy for me as the director at New Trier to say we don't need competition because the community clearly values the arts, and the kids, have an amazing work ethic, and they're brilliant. And I mean, 80 to 90% of all the kids in the band program study privately.
Okay.
And I don't require it. I mean,
Sure.
It's optional, but that's the expectation of the community and the parents.
But just so like somebody listening to this doesn't go to their administration and say, we're pulling the plug on all competition.
Yeah, I think it's all relative.
There's a lot more that goes into it. For example, out here, like we do IHSA solo and ensemble contest because the school pays for IHSA solo and ensemble.
Yeah.
They don't pay for one that we might host here.
Right.
So, right. That's just been things I've been thinking about, as well. Or if you're at...
well, actually, funny you should mention that, though, because at Wabanzi, in Indian Prairie School District with Nequa, and this was before Mattia came into existence, that was one of the ways that Chip actually sold the solo ensemble is... Instead of using district monies to pay for this event, why don't we do our own in-house event? And then, he would talk about these are the student benefits. This is this cost savings. Because, usually when you do it in-house, you're going to save money. You're not paying for buses or, whatever else. So that's one thing you might consider.
Okay. So did that still then, come from district funds still to...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely learned something already. Because sometimes money really does, dictate.
Oh, I know.
You know how things are going to happen. Because I've also thought too, and I said this on the Rodney Dorsey podcast, where like I grew up in this area, free reduced lunch kid, and when we would get those notches in our belt, like that's something that made me feel valuable.
Yeah.
Just because we felt not like we didn't have anything, but this was a big deal to us at that point.
Right.
So especially I think for me growing up, it was, we would look at people in other towns, oh, they have everything, they have this, they have that, and which isn't true. But me, as I'm getting older, that's just kind of something I'm focusing on is the competition. And for me, it's like how to quit it.
Yeah.
Or, shift thinking.
I think there are so many festivals nowadays that have moved away from rankings and ratings that it's a lot easier to, like, we go to the Chicagoland Invitational Concert Band Festival.
And you're always exhibition, right?
Yeah. And we're one of the only.
Yeah.
But, and I don't regret it at all. Like, there's no part of me that goes, gee, I wonder what those other directors are thinking about. It doesn't cross my mind. I mean, and my kids have a fantastic experience. They get to hear other awesome high school bands, the featured college band, and then they work with, a national clinician. So the value is there.
All right. Not that I have to answer to you, but I'm going to commit to you that when I go this year, I'm going to be an exhibition band as well. Right. I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Take the plunge.
And they're not going to talk about you, but then they'll talk about me.
I doubt it.
So let's go further into New Trier because, as you talked, it might be a bit different than other people's situation. Already you're talking about 80 to 90% private lessons. That is not enforced by you. You can't really enforce that today with many places at all. Yeah. But can you kind of tell me maybe, I don't want to say a typical place, a typical year at New Trier, but, maybe how you design the year, some special things that you guys might do during that school year for your musicians?
Right. Well, New Trier is incredibly unique as an institution and then also as a fine arts department. So we have a 9-period day plus an early bird, so essentially a 10-period day. But that means that our periods are only 40 minutes long.
Okay.
So we have very short rehearsals. And because of the culture of the school, I cannot have sectionals over a lunch period or before school because that's the 0 hour or after school because a lot of our kids are in sports. So our entire program is really during the school day, just those 40 minutes. And I don't have like weekly night rehearsals either. I mean, we just get it done during class time.
Okay.
I do have co-teacher, so we can split into sectionals. So in a 5-day week, 2 days of those would be large group sectionals. And then we also have a percussion instructor that only comes in 1 day a week. So 1 day a week will be split into 3 groups: percussion, woodwinds, brass. And then the other would just be, brass and woodwinds with one of the groups picking up the percussion. So we're really only in full rehearsals then 3 days a week.
Okay.
That's how it basically works out. With my top group, I also do a chamber music unit, but again, it's during class time, and we do it twice a year. So each chamber group will have a total of 5 rehearsals, and then depending on the time of year, they'll either play for the class in the fall or they'll play at the Solo Ensemble Festival in March. And the other thing is we have to be really conscientious about how we balance kids' involvement because band is curricular, orchestra is curricular, including the winds and percussion.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And jazz is curricular. So we have 4 wind ensembles, 4 jazz bands, 4 orchestras, 2 of which have full-time winds and percussion.
Okay.
So many of our kids are taking 2 music classes. Some of them are taking 3. And they are required to be in band as like their core music class. Okay. We call that co-enrollment. So knowing that, a kid in my top band, I like a good 50% of those kids are also in orchestra and or jazz. I can only schedule so many extra events outside of the school day because they're already playing all those concerts.
Yeah.
So when you look at our off-campus performance schedule compared to a typical suburban school, we're usually, on paper, it looks like we're doing a lot less because I'll take the band out off campus for maybe one festival a year.
Okay.
Not 2 or 3. And we don't have a marching band either. So the great thing is we're doing wind ensemble all year long. So
half of the audience went, "What?" And the other half went, "Please tell me how."
I know. I just dropped a bomb there, but honestly, that was part of the appeal of teaching at New Trier in the first place. Was, all of the groups are curricular, and there's no marching band.
Okay.
So it's just a lot more reasonable in terms of its demands.
Sure. So that's funny you say that, because again, it sounds like somebody's dream job and also somebody else's worst nightmare. Right. With that, and that's kind of funny. So when we think about maybe special events, because I know in the past the group has played at huge festivals and has done performance tours. How do you get into that? How do you look at that for the year? Is that something that you definitely plan well in advance, or these maybe opportunities that just kind of come up?
Yeah, I mean, I try to every 2 or 3 years do something of significance for the program, whether it be the National Concert Band Festival or the Midwest Clinic, or this coming year we were accepted to play at the State Music Conference. And part of my thinking there was 2020 just sounds like a good milestone.
Yeah.
To go play at the state conference. But then, sprinkled in there too, we've done some international tours. So we've been to Australia. We have a sister high school there, and they're slated to come back to New Trier in a couple of years. So that's a pretty significant exchange there. A few years ago, we did an Italy tour, and just last year we did Carnegie Hall. Okay. So I think more than anything, it's sort of spacing it out and pacing it for our kids, so that in any one year we're not doing multiple things.
And I know when we had John Thompson on here before, he would talk about his concerts. He said he almost never had a concert without a guest conductor or a soloist. And I was looking at the website. It looks like you guys are, following that tradition a little bit still while doing some other things as well.
Yeah. And one great tradition that John started, which I continue to this day, is the invitational concert, similar to our Jazz Fest. Jazz Fest is its own entity. It's the largest non-competitive jazz festival in the United States.
Okay.
And so basically that's a second band festival. So if you only have one jazz band at your school, you can bring it to the festival, but most schools have more than one. So you bring your second or third band, and there's no ratings. So that was created by our previous director of jazz, Jim Warwick, in his second or third year at New Trier. And so similarly, John Thompson created the Invitational Concert, which is a concert band concert, his first or second year at New Trier as well. And I think we're coming up close to 40. I think we might be at maybe 38 this year.
Okay.
But the concept there is very simple. We invite 1 or 2 guest schools to come out, share a concert with us. They come out late afternoon. Then we have a dinner together where the kids get to interact and meet each other and converse. And then we play the concert together. And then afterwards, we do a little post-concert reception, do another similar visit. And so there's no element of competition involved. It's not like your typical festival where you're getting evaluated.
Sure.
You're just playing a concert, with another school. And so one of the things that we've done in terms of guest artists is, sometimes we'll include a guest conductor. So this last year we had Dennis Zeisler out from Old Dominion University in Virginia, and he guest conducted the New Trier Band on a piece, and then guest conducted the Vernon Hills High School Band on a piece. And so that's just another way that sort of brings the two groups closer. Hey, we both worked with the same guest conductor. A few years ago, we played at Symphony Center for the Invitational the year that New Trier was being renovated. So we wanted to do something special for the kids because we were essentially rehearsing in a garage that year.
Without a home there.
We had no home. So that year, we featured Stephen Williamson, who's the principal clarinetist with the CSO, who happens to live in our district. But he played the Concertina concertino by Von Weber.
I thought you were going to say the Von Halen concerto or something.
Is it? It's not Von. It's just Weber.
No, it's Van Halen. Yeah.
No, it's just Weber.
Oh, Weber. Oh, I'm talking about Van Halen still.
No, I know. I got you. We featured him on the Weber concertino, and it was the fastest version I have ever heard. He's got fingers of lightning, and I kid you not, he was double tonguing on the clarinet. I have no idea how he was tonguing that fast. So those are just some of the cool things, unique things that we try to build into the Invitational.
So if we talk to a new Trier kid, from their perspective, what do you think are some of their favorite memories of the band program at New Trier?
I think like many kids, the trips, like we typically don't go to Disney, right? Because we don't have a marching band. And, the New Trier community, a lot of those families are taking pretty elaborate trips on their own.
Sure.
So when we travel as a music community, whether it be band with the orchestra or band with the jazz or so on and so forth, we're usually doing things like Carnegie Hall or the Sydney Opera House or, a tour of Italy. So those are really significant memories that the kids carry with them. The kids really enjoy the Invitational and Jazz Fest. I think that's the other thing about the whole non-competitive philosophy is there's just no pretense of comparison.
Okay.
None. You're in the moment enjoying music making and relating to other kids no matter where they go to school. I mean, there's no, standoffishness. Yeah. The kids are just very open and, hey, where do you go to school? And I really enjoyed your performance and,
So you get to play some great music and then make 50 new friends. Each one of those at least. So very cool. Comprehensive musicianship. And this is a project you're passionate about. Your name always comes up with comprehensive musicianship. And I know that's kind of a movement started in the 70s. And I think the question I was asking you, is if you can maybe talk to us a little bit about that. Has comprehensive musicianship, has it taken over like you thought it would have? Is it something that is still maybe misunderstood in the schools?
Well, I think it's definitely taken root, but it's growing. Basically the Illinois version of it was created only 8 years ago.
Okay.
And so we have a committee of teachers and we meet quarterly. And most of our meetings are planning for our summer workshop, which occurs at Northern Illinois University. And we just had it a couple weeks ago this summer in June. And comprehensive musicianship, it started in Wisconsin in the late 70s. And what's really unique about it is that it draws on teachers from all areas. So it's not just a band thing. It's not just an orchestra thing. There are band, choir, orchestra, and general music teachers at all grade levels, K through 12, that are all talking about how to best teach music. So CMP is many things sort of simultaneously. So CMP is a model for planning music instruction. So it sort of becomes like a long-term lesson plan, how to teach a piece, okay? CMP is also then becomes a way of thinking about music and teaching music. There's also the CMP community, all these teachers that are, into this form of teaching. And then there's the workshop. The summer workshop is the most comprehensive, yes, pun intended, I guess, but it's the easiest way to learn the full model and learn how to integrate it in your own classroom. So essentially, CMP is just that. It's comprehensive. It's teaching more than just notes and rhythms. Mm-hmm. It's teaching transferable concepts and music history and music theory and things that go beyond just learning how to play one single piece of music or even 4 or 5 pieces of music for a single concert.
Okay. So what is assumed with comprehensive musicianship if you're approaching a piece that way? Do we assume the kids have notes and rhythms down, or is that a part of that lesson planning, probably in the initial stages of it?
Yeah.
Okay. So like if I could put you on the spot and I throw a piece at you right now. So like if we're we'll put Carmina Burana out there, for example, okay, just because that's kind of, we got voices, we got wind instruments, we got string instruments there for that. So if I'm taking a comprehensive musicianship approach to that, what am I coming out with as opposed to, the director just kind of beating the notes and rhythms into me, and if you're not hardcore into the history of Carmina Burana, neither am I. So, I don't.
Well, I've never performed the piece except with a good old marching band, Wabanzi Valley. But
or you could even insert your own piece that you have an example.
Well, no,
of
but I know enough about it.
Sure.
I mean, Karl Orff, it's bacchanalian in nature, and so, not that might be the most ideal.
I was going to say, I picked the least appropriate piece. Right?
But no, I mean, that's it. Learning more about the history of the piece and, what is the opera about. And so in the CMP model, you identify 3 outcomes that you want to work on extensively with a given piece. And one of them is a skill outcome, which would be sort of the notes and rhythms, like how are you going to perform an aspect of that piece well, okay? And then the second outcome is a knowledge outcome. So that's typically music theory, music history. And with Carmina Burana, that would be a pretty easy vehicle to talk about opera tradition and the history of, Carmina Burana and so on and so forth, and the fact that it's a transcription and because it's easy enough to put any piece of music in front of students and teach them just how to play that piece without talking about how it came into existence, its roots, its relevancy, its traditions.
Yeah.
So that's what the knowledge outcome addresses. And then the last outcome is sort of the intangible, if you will, of music, which is the affective outcome. And usually in the music tradition, we would call that the aesthetic, right? To learn how to appreciate the beauty of the art. But in the CMP language, affective is broader than just an aesthetic or appreciation of beauty. It's what are the values, opinions, beliefs that we as humans hold dear and true, and we, like through this piece, what's something that we could learn about us as humans.
Okay.
Maybe through Carmina Burana, you talk about the imperfection of humans, that we have sins and vices, and
I'm going to have to put it like a PG-13 on this episode now.
Well, there have been no swear words yet.
No, nothing.
But
you're like, just wait till the end.
Through that lens of a skill outcome, knowledge outcome, affective outcome, you then scaffold it over, your rehearsal cycle, whether it's 5 weeks, 8 weeks, or super short 3 weeks, whatever. And you go deeper. Okay. I mean, that's the essence. You're just going way deeper into the music than you would from just the physical requirement of this is how you play.
It's funny you say that because I'm thinking with my own shortcomings with it. We were doing one year, The Hounds of Spring. Love the piece. And I thought the kids knew everything that this piece embodied, because I read them the program notes.
And the poem.
Right. And we talked about it the first week. And then we had a guest clinician come in, and I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks later, and said, now, has Mr. Stinson told you about this piece? And I remember looking at the little kids and said, no. and I try to have a good report with the kids. I'm like, you traitors. Yes, we did. We talked about this, And then they went, oh, okay, yeah, now I remember it. So, of course, my initial thought when you're talking about comprehensive musicianship and getting into these things is that, well, these are things we already do. But then here I have evidence of kids saying, no, we don't remember this without this specific jogging of the memory now. And even then, what we could tell you was in the program notes in the poem.
Right.
So that right there is something that I'm like, yeah, you're right. We do need to get deeper in these things. We do need to, help these students kind of form some of these connections. So if somebody's wanting to get into comprehensive musicianship, I know you mentioned the workshop, but are there things that they can also find online if they're trying to just dip their toe into this a little bit at first?
Yeah, we have a website, of course, ilcmp.org.
Okay.
Where you'll find sample teaching plans. more about the model, just a description and overview. There are 5 points to the model. It's basically in the shape of a star.
Okay.
And so the 5 areas, let's see if I can rattle these off. Music selection, analysis, which is basically score study.
Sure.
Outcomes, which I told you about. Strategies, which is what we're all good at as teachers. How are you going to teach the piece? Your teaching techniques. And then the last point is assessment.
Okay.
And what's pretty remarkable about the model is, it was created in 1977.
Sure.
And those 5 points of the model are still completely relevant today. You've got music selection. Who doesn't talk about music selection? Like, that's a hot topic anywhere, anytime, right? Music selection, analysis, a score study, teaching outcomes. That's still, a very prevalent word. Assessment is always big, and your teaching strategies. It's totally timeless. I think the model's very timeless. And our motto is teaching with intention, performing with understanding. And so it's doing what you were talking about with that program note, but then, teaching it over and scaffolding it and learning it again and again and again so that it becomes part of the student consciousness.
Sure. So, and it sounds like something too that if you're a new teacher or a veteran teacher, that you probably plug most of those things into your evaluation when you're trying to prove what you do.
It's pretty uncanny how well the CMP teaching plan will appease any Danielson evaluation. Okay. It's a perfect fit.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Which, hopefully then, you're doing right by the kids, you're doing right by the music, and then you're also helping yourself.
Yeah. One of the chief complaints of people that don't fully understand the CMP model is they say, well, that's great, but when are you going to learn how to play the piece?
Yeah.
How are you going to do all this extra stuff? How do you have time to go deeper? And a lot of it I found, having done this for several years now, it's just the language. It's the way that you teach the piece and how you talk to the students.
Yeah.
Giving them a frame of reference as you go.
Absolutely. So music selection is one of those components, and that will lead us to, one of my next questions that we could, maybe help out some people beginning the field or even those who have been teaching for a while, but recommendation of some band works, maybe specifically lesser known band works. We all kind of know the war horses. We know the tried and true pieces. Are there any pieces that you can think of that maybe people should, pay attention to, maybe at least sight read with their band, if not perform?
Well, I'm a real strong advocator for Michael Markowski's music. Okay. I used to be involved in a commissioning consortium that Jim Cull at St. Charles North, I think he's probably still doing it to this day. But we had commissioned Michael Markowski back in 2011, and he produced the piece Dreamland. And it was one of the first commissioned pieces that really spoke to me. I was like, wow, this is a winner. This is great music. Mm-hmm. And when I played it with the kids, they really connected with it. And so then the following year, when we played at the Midwest Clinic, I programmed that because I really wanted to put it out there. Since that time, I've kept a close eye on his catalog, and one piece that I'm sure is going to really stand the test of time is the Cave You Fear.
Okay.
It's just an amazing work, and it's got a lot of depth. It's really just a grade 3 piece, but the year that I performed that piece, we were playing at the NBA Director's Workshop at McCracken Middle School with Chip DiStefano. And so I was playing it with my top group, but it was a grade 3 piece, mm-hmm. and the kids loved it.
Yeah.
And I often think that's an indicator of like a really well-crafted composition is even your most sophisticated musicians are like, this is great music.
Yeah.
And it has some unusual instrumentation. It uses super ball mallet on the timpani in the middle. And there's an overtone that he includes the fingering for on the saxophone. It's basically playing a low B flat without the C key.
Okay.
And it makes this just outrageously loud, unearthly overtone. It's just like this moaning that it's indescribable.
Okay. I was going to say, so no different than the normal saxophone tone.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
right,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
2 trumpet players here.
But then another piece that I just recently performed this spring by Michael Markowski was City Trees,
Okay.
which is more of like a grade 5, just a beautiful lyrical cantabile piece. Some easier pieces too. Like I'm always looking for stuff that my freshman band and my sophomore band can play. There are a few by Brian Balmages that I really enjoy. Sun Cycles uses a synthetic scale,
Okay.
what you would call the double harmonic major scale. Okay. It basically, if you take the top 4 notes of 2 harmonic minor scales,
All right.
and then butt them up against each other. So
Okay.
like if you took the top 4 notes of the C harmonic scale and then the top 4 notes of the G harmonic scale,
Okay.
and it's a really cool sound. So that's used in Sun Cycles, and then ironically that same scale is used in a different piece, which I also like to alternate with Sun Cycles, called Snake Charmer by Randall Standridge.
Okay.
Another piece that I think the name of it's a little unfortunate, but I love the music. It's called Rippling Watercolors by Brian Balmages. And my wife, who is a musician but not a band director, told me after I performed that with my freshman band, like maybe a year and a half ago, she said, "That's one of the most beautiful, moving pieces I've ever heard any of your bands play."
Wow.
I was like, well, that's pretty high praise. So,
And I'm sorry, I guess I could just go back and listen to this, but Rippling Watercolors, you said?
Rippling Watercolors.
Okay.
Yeah. We're preparing to play at IMEC next January, so I'm really like perusing a lot of music right now because I want to play something new that's worthwhile that I want to expose directors to. So I'm also looking at some compositions by Jody Blackshaw.
Okay.
Peace Dancer is kind of a cool one. Moments by Alex Shapiro. She uses some pre-recorded music similar to what Stephen Bryant was it Ecstatic Waters? Is that
I think so. And Alex Shapiro, she did, was it Paper Cut?
Yep.
Was that her other one? Okay.
Yep.
Or one of her other ones, I should say.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Matt, what are, as we kind of end this here, maybe some challenges that you'd like to go over that you faced as a new teacher, or current challenges that you face now that you could give to some of our audience as a warning, maybe, that says, listen, if you're going to do this instead, or this is what could happen.
Well, I mean, I think we touched on this a little bit when we were talking about, new teacher burnout. And yeah, I think it's really important to pace yourself. I think you need to go slow to go far. Mm-hmm. A really powerful phrase that I just read this past year in Richard Floyd's book, The Artistry of Teaching and Making Music. There's a line in there, only do what only you alone can do. Meaning we oftentimes are willing to do lots of mindless, sort of peripheral things for our job that anybody could do. Meaning like your student staff or, a support staff or somebody other than you, because there are a million things that you could be doing at any given moment to get things, done for your program. But there are actually very few things that you are the only person qualified to do. So learning to focus on those things and learning to let go a little bit, because I'm a perfectionist, and many of us are sort of type A as band directors. We're very driven, we're very particular, but you got to be willing to let go and let a few mistakes be made by other people, because more will get done.
So you're saying you shouldn't get mad at the font that like your band parent organization uses, or as long as it's not Comic Sans or something, of course,
Right. One of the things that I learned at Wabanzi Valley from one of my assistant principals there, Dr. Rudy Keller, he always used to say, use the case method, copy and steal everything. And I thought, well, that's kind of funny, but there's a lot of truth to that. I don't know that any of the directors are really innovative in and of themselves.
Yeah.
I think the innovation is when we learn from each other and we pick and choose the things that speak to us as teachers, because it's not a one size fits all, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you on the podium, me on the podium, like there are many different ways to skin a cat, and get similar results or get very different results. But I think it's the way in which we combine all those influences and all those little, our tool bag of tricks. It's the way that we combine them that makes us innovative as teachers.
And it's funny you say that, because there's certain things that I'll say to my band, and then we'll have a clinician come out. Look, you stole that from him. Yeah, I did. And then there's some of the small things too. Like I'll never forget here the first time I had a band info night, and I put out our band handbook, and the front, it's Joliet Central High School band. Okay. And then you open up the first paragraph. The Hersey Instrumental Organization prides itself. Oops, forgot to find and replace on that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any, as we kind of close this out, what are your thoughts on music education today? Is there anything that we as music teachers need to be, helping to push or helping to bring more recognition to?
I just think ceaselessly advocating for our programs and the value of music. Okay. I'm pretty disillusioned by the whole STEM movement, and I think STEAM was an afterthought. Oops, we forgot art, so let's just throw an A. And I really think it is very science, technology, mathematics driven, and I just worry about sort of the inhumanness of it all. I think music is so vital to developing our kids and just their sense of self-worth and who they are, and their sense of self-discipline, and yes, their aesthetic, their ability to appreciate beauty in the world around them. Even at New Trier, I have found that I have to advocate much more now than I had to when I started even just 12 years ago. Just society in general is so obsessed with academics and achievement, and especially at New Trier, getting into the best college possible.
Yeah.
But the irony is, the kids that go all the way through our music program, those are the kids that are getting into like Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, like all these really high profile colleges that some of our New Trier parents want their students to go to.
Sure.
Those are the kids that are really successful in music and then go on to, equally magnificent institutions.
So, well, thank you for coming out here, Matt. I appreciate this. And is there anything, any big goals you have coming up, either with yourself or the band? Any big goals for the summer besides
just relax,
get out of the house a couple of times? Well,
I'm one of those people. I know some people can work right through the summer, but I always need a significant pause.
Yeah.
Like a significant break, and I found that that's what really makes me very successful then during the school years, because I built up all that endurance and stamina again to get it through another school year. So I hope you enjoy your summer break as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming out, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely.